Hi everyone and welcome to this video. In this video we will learn about another useful concept of Python, which is the looping constructs. Now just like every other video before, we understand how they work. Let's first take an example to even realize why we actually need them in Python. So suppose you have this task. You want to print the sentences "Python is awesome" 1,000 times. Now, based on whatever you have learned till now, how will you do that? Well, the simplest approach would be to just say print Python is awesome again and again for 1,000 times. Now, at this point, you might already be wondering if there is a better way to do this. Well, guess what? There's actually a better way to do this in Python using the looping statements. Let's try to write the pseudo-code for this task. Now, the pseudo-code for this task will simply be a single line. The first thing that you want to do is you want to print the sentences "Python is awesome." And the second thing that you want to do is you want to repeat these sentences 1,000 times. That's all. Here is how the code looks like in Python. We are using what is known as for loop. Let's learn more about the for loop. On the right hand side, see the syntax of the for loop. Generally speaking, the way for loop is designed is you write for, and then you write the variable which will keep on iterating or repeating over your data, and you will use the in keyword, and after that you will give the sequence on which it has to iterate. Then you give a colon to mark the start of for block, and then you will let all the statements that you want to repeat by giving the appropriate indentation. So notice that here we are giving for space indentation. So now let's come back to Python code to understand this better. So this is the for loop through which you perform this task. Do you notice any similarities or differences in both the pseudocode and the final code? Let me see. So the first thing is, just like the conditionals, we use the colon and we use an indentation to denote start of a new code block. So this basically means anything that you write from here onwards using for space indentation belongs to this for loop. So that will be executed 1,000 times because we are saying for I in range 1,000. So that means we want to run this statement 1,000 times. Now this 1,000 is actually known as a stop condition of your for loop. It basically tells the program that when does it stop repeating the statement. So in this case, we wanted these sentences to be printed 1,000 times, so our stop condition was actually 1,000. And that's what we write inside the range function. So just like conditionals, there are also different types of looping techniques in Python. In order to understand how these techniques differ, let's start with an example. So consider scenario number 1. You know, you have a couple of subjects in your semester, and out of those subjects you have to pass at least in 5 subjects in order to go to the next semester. So in this case the stopping condition is 5. Let's try to write a code for this. So this is how the for loop code will look like for this scenario. You say for, then you say subject, which is a variable that will iterate for each subject in range 5. So 5 is the stopping condition, as we already know. And each time in the loop you want to pass an exam for one subject. And this thing will keep on repeating 5 times. So this was scenario 1, where we actually knew beforehand what is the stop condition, like how many times we have to keep on repeating before we can stop. But just like real life, even in programming, there are situations where you do not actually know how many times you need to repeat yourself. Let's understand that with scenario number 2. So scenario number 2 is slightly related to the previous one. This scenario, you have to get at least an A grade in math to pass. Now, unlike the previous scenario, in this case, you don't know how many times you have to practice math or practice exercises and reread your book that you can get an A grade. So you don't know when you can stop. Instead, what you can do is you can keep trying until you succeed. So every time you prepare for the math exam, you study some chapters, perform some calculations on exercises, and then you take an exam. You don't get a good grade, then you try again and again and again. For this kind of situation, you need a new kind of looping, and that's what while loop does in Python. So this is how a code of while loop looks like. You write while, then you give some condition, and whatever you write inside the code block of while loop will keep on executing until this condition or comparison gives you a false. So as long as this condition is true, while loop will keep on trying. So in this case, instead of explicitly saying how many times you have to repeat, you say what is the stopping criteria you have. Because in this case, you may not always know how many iterations you need in order to, say, for example, become really good at maths so that you can secure a grade. So the syntax of while loop is very similar to the for loop. You just say while give a comparison or a condition, and then you write all the statements. Of course, here also you use the colons and the indentation to denote the code block. So in this video, we learned two different kinds of loops, for loop and while loop. The for loop is a go-to loop when you actually know explicitly how many iterations or repetitions you want for your task. And the while loop is a good loop when you do not explicitly know how many iterations you want, but you know what is the stopping criteria. So this was for loop and while loop in Python. Let's go to the next video where we'll actually implement this in code and understand this better.